"My daddy died today. Can we sleep in your barn tonight?" The rancher opened the door and said, "Welcome home. Texas High Plains, late autumn, 1874. The sky burned red as if the sun were bleeding out across the horizon. Dry wind stirred the golden grass, whispering secrets through the cedar fence posts. The land stretched quiet and godless beneath the dying light, save for the steady creak of old floorboards in a weathered ranch house perched on a gentle rise. Inside, Jack Callahan sat near the window, a heavy Bible open on his lap. His fingers rested on the yellowed page, but his eyes stared past the print. Vacant. 38 years old and twice as worn, Jack lived alone for nearly a decade now, ever since the fever took Lucy and their baby boy in one cruel summer week. He did not smile much, did not speak often. But every evening, as habit demanded, he read from Psalms, as Lucy once asked him to do, even after she was gone. That was when he heard it. Knock knock, faint like branches brushing glass. He blinked, unsure if the sound was real. Then it came again. 3 soft raps, fragile as a bird's heartbeat. Jack rose. He crossed the room, slow, cautious. His cold hung on the wall above the door frame, untouched, but always loaded. Out here, no one knocked after dusk, unless it was bad news, or worse. When he opened the door, he looked down and saw her. A little girl, no taller than his hip, stood in the last light of day. Her blonde hair was tangled with dust. Her cheeks stray with dried tears and trail dirt. Her dress, if it once had color, was now the hue of gravel. She clutched the torn hem in both fists. Her bare feet bled where sharp rocks had bitten. Her voice came small, cracking under its own weight. "My daddy died today. Can we sleep in your barn tonight?" Behind her, crumpled in the dirt like a discarded rag doll, lay a young woman, her mother. She was unconscious, her dress torn at the sleeve, legs scraped raw from walking through bramble and stone. Her chest barely moved. Blood had dried at her temple. One of her shoes was gone. Jack stared, heart thudding. The girl's eyes shimmered with something far older than 4 years, a kind of knowing that should never belong to someone so small. He knelt, feeling his knees crack as he lowered himself to her level. "What is your name, sweetheart?" he asked, voice gentle, rasped from disuse. "Clara," she whispered. Her lower lip trembled. "Mama fell down. She will not wake up." Jack looked at the woman, pale, frail, but breathing. "Your mama's name?" "Eliza." He swallowed hard. He did not ask more. "Not yet. You ain't sleeping in no barn, sweetheart," he said, voice thick with something he had not felt in years. "You'll come home." He lifted Clara into one arm, then bent and gathered Eliza carefully into the other. She was light, too light, as if her bones were giving up. Her head fell gently against his shoulder. Clara curled her arms around his neck. Inside, the fire had gone low, but the warmth of the room seemed to rise as he brought them in. Jack laid Eliza on the old sofa, covering her with the only clean quilt he owned. He placed Clara on a stool near the hearth and poured water from a jug into a cup, offering it with steady hands. She drank in silence. Then, as the cup slipped from her fingers, she looked up at him and said, "One more thing. I think Mama walked all day just for me." Jack did not know how to answer that, so he said nothing. He simply placed a hand on her tangled hair and kept it there until she stopped shaking. Outside, the wind died down. But inside, a heart that had long gone quiet began to stir again. Eliza stirred beneath the warmth of the quilt, but her body betrayed her, aching and fevered in the haze of half-consciousness. Her mind slipped backward, past the firelit room, past the steady hands of the man who had carried her, back to a time just weeks ago, when hope still rode beside her. They had been a family of 3, Daniel Grace, her husband, Clara, their daughter, and Eliza herself, 24, and dreaming of a place to belong. They left Missouri in the early spring, chasing whispers of good land and better chances far out west. The wagon they rode was battered but held treasures. Sacks of corn seed, her mother's wedding shawl, a sewing kit, a cracked silver locket, and a wooden hair comb Daniel carved for her on their first anniversary. That comb still rested somewhere beneath the ruins. Daniel had driven the wagon with calloused hands and eyes that never stopped scanning the horizon. He had been a quiet man, but steady. When he laughed, it made the prairie feel like church. When he kissed Eliza, He made her believe the world might just hold more good than bad. But the world did not. They were 3 days from the settlement at Dry Creek when the ambush came. It happened between 2 hills where the land narrowed and the mesquite grew thick. A sudden crack of gunfire shattered the hum of ceases. Daniel shouted. Horses screamed. They came fast, 5 of them, faces wrapped in cloth, guns raised, teeth yellowed like corn husks left too long in the sun. At their head rode a man with a black hat and eyes like oil slicks. His name, Eliza would learn later from whispers in town, was Clay Dunn, a former Confederate sergeant turned outlaw. He had been robbing settlers and freight wagons all across the territory, leaving behind only burnt wagons and widows. Daniel pushed Eliza and Clara behind the wagon seat just as the first bullet hit him square in the chest. She saw him fall, not in slow motion, not with drama, but all at once like a puppet with its strings cut. Blood sprayed across the canvas top. He did not scream. His last sound was her name. Eliza tried to run, holding Clara close, but the men tore her from her daughter's arms. She screamed, fought, bit, scratched. They laughed. Clay held her down with one hand and called it a tax for traveling through his land. Clara was too small, too quiet, and too frightened to be seen. She crawled beneath the shattered axle, pressed against the dirt, covering her ears with tiny hands as her mother's cries echoed into the sky. When Eliza awoke, the men were gone. Smoke curled from what was left of the wagon. Daniel's body lay still beside the trail, his eyes open to the heavens. The haircomb was broken. The seeds were scattered like spilled prayers. She found Clara sleeping beneath a horse blanket, eyes swollen, arms shaking. Eliza could not bury Daniel. She did not have the strength. She pressed her lips to his forehead, whispered, "Forgive me," and turned away. The days that followed were a blur of dust and willpower. Eliza had one goal: find a roof. Any roof. She did not know where they were or how far they'd come. She only knew Clara needed water, warmth, safety. They traveled by moonlight at first, hiding in dry ravines by day. Her boots fell apart on the second day, and her feet blistered until she walked on raw skin. Clara cried for her father each night. Elisa did not cry. There was no time for tears when survival had to be carried like a wounded child. Every night she sang the same song, voice almost silent. "Hush, little darling. Don't you cry. Mama's here and stars don't lie." On the 4th day, Eliza collapsed in the sand. Her vision swam with heat and hunger. She felt herself drifting, bones heavy as stone. She told Clara to keep walking, to find a house, to knock gently. "Ask for the barn," she whispered. "Say please." Then the world went black. Now in this warm room, smelling of smoke and stew, Eliza trembled in her sleep. Her face twisted with the pain of what she had seen and lost. A soft whimper escaped her lips. She muttered Daniel's name into the dark. Across the room, Jack Callahan sat silently, sharpening a kitchen knife, the Bible still opened beside him. He watched over them without asking questions, only waiting, like a man who understood pain well enough to let it speak when it was ready. Outside, the night howled gently through the trees. But inside, the last flicker of the fire cast a glow over mother and child, safe for the first time in days. And in her dreams, Eliza walked barefoot beside a wagon that no longer burned. The night turned colder as the last embers in the hearth crackled low. Jack Callahan moved quietly through the cabin, lantern in hand. Outside, wind stirred snow across the high ridge. Inside, a woman and a child slept beneath borrowed quilts on a straw mattress he'd laid near the fire. Elisa lay still, wrapped in an old wool blanket, her breathing shallow but steady. Her dress was torn, her feet raw. Jack had tucked one of Lucy's old shawls around her shoulders. He hadn't asked who she was or where she came from. Not yet. Clara curled beside her mother, one hand clutching the blanket. Her cheeks were pink from heat and exhaustion, but she slept without crying. That alone felt like a miracle. Jack watched them a while, arms crossed, unsure how to carry the quiet, now full of breath and presence. Something tender and broken had entered his world, and made the silence feel different. He moved to the kitchen corner and filled a basin with warm water. With a clean rag, he crouched beside the mattress and cleaned the dirt and blood from Eliza's hands, split knuckles, scraped palms. She never stirred. He turned to Clara. Her legs were muddy, her arms bruised. He washed and dried her feet, then wrapped them in wool socks from an old drawer. They were too big, but warm. At the back of the cabin, Jack found a faded dress in Lucy's old trunk. Simple, cotton, small. He lit another lantern and retrieved a half-rusted sewing kit. His fingers, rough from years of rope and wood, worked slowly. He stitched the torn hem of Clara's dress, brown thread looping in uneven lines. The rhythm calmed him. Without thinking, he began to hum, a tune Lucy once sang while sewing. He paused when he caught himself, then kept humming. By the time he finished, the sky outside had turned from black to pale gray. Dawn was near. Jack chopped onions and carrot, stripped meat from the last of the smoked chicken. He stirred the pot over the fire until the broth turned rich and fragrant. The scent brought memories, gentle ones, aching ones. He poured a portion into a wooden bowl and set it near the hearth to cool. Behind him, a small voice broke the hush. "Is it morning?" Jack turned. Clara sat up slowly, hair ts-led, blinking at the dim light. "Near enough," he said. She looked around. "Where's Mama?" "Still sleeping," Jack answered. "She needs it." Clara scooted closer to the bowl. "What's that?" "Chicken stew," he said. "Old recipe. Did you make it?" "I did." She considered that. "Can I have some?" "You may." He handed her a spoon and watched her eat. She was hungry but careful. Between bites, she kept glancing toward her mother. Jack admired that. After a few spoonfuls, she asked, "Do you live here alone?" "I do," he said after a pause. When Jack looked into the fire, some things change, some things stay. She seemed satisfied with that. Setting the spoon down, she crawled over to the little wooden horse he'd left on the stool. "You made this." "I did." She ran her fingers along its mane. "I like it." He sat nearby. "I hoped you would." A quiet moment passed. Then she said, certain as sunlight, "I'm going to call you Uncle Jack." Jack blinked, taken, then softly replied, "Well, now I reckon that'd be just fine." And something shifted deep inside him. Not by force, just a child's voice and a little trust. And a house long empty didn't feel quite so hollow anymore. Eliza awoke with a start. Her hands clawed at the blanket, and her breath came in shallow gasps. The ceiling above her was wood, not canvas. There was no fire, no smoke, no screaming, only stillness. A low voice spoke gently beside her. "You are safe now, ma'am." She turned her head fast, eyes wild. Jack Callahan stood a few feet away, holding a tin plate with a square of cornbread and a dollop of blackberry jam. He made no move toward her, just placed the plate on the small table nearby. Liza pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt. Her eyes darted toward Clara, still curled up on the cot beside the hearth, hugging a stuffed doll jacket carved and stitched together with scraps. "Where are we?" Her voice cracked from dryness. "My ranch," Jack replied. "West Ridge, about 10 miles from Dry Creek. You've been sleeping nearly 2 days." She tried to rise but winced at the pain in her leg. "Do not push it," Jack said calmly. "Rest comes first, and food." He pushed the plate a little closer. "You do not have to say anything. Not today." Eliza stared at the cornbread. Her stomach growled despite her pride. Slowly, she reached for it. As she bit into the soft crust, her eyes fluttered shut. It tasted like something long lost. Over the days that followed, Eliza began to heal. Not completely, not yet, but in pieces. She insisted on helping. Jack did not argue. He merely handed her gloves and pointed to the overgrown garden plot. She dug her fingers into the soil, turning earth and sorrow alike. She mended old yokes and stitched up torn saddle bags. Jack noticed she felt safe, but because stillness meant remembering. Clara found joy in the barn where a calf had recently been born. She named him Buttons and fed him daily with a tin pail nearly as big as her head. Jack watched her from a distance at first, careful not to crowd her, but slowly she began calling for him. "Uncle Jack Buttons is licking my boots again." He chuckled the first time she said it. One cool morning he led Clara to the corral. Inside stood a young paint pony with a white blaze and a shaggy mane. "This here's Dusty," he said, patting the pony's neck. "She's gentle, still learning, just like someone I know." Clara gasped. "She's mine." Jack shook his head. "She's her own, but I reckon she would not mind letting you ride. He lifted her into the saddle, careful and slow, her hands gripping the horn tight. Hold your shoulders up. There you go. Trust her. With a steady hand, Jack guided Dusty in a slow circle around the paddock. Clara's laughter bubbled up, high, bright, unstoppable. A laugh that cracked through the still morning like sunlight-piercing cloud. Eliza stood by the fence, her hands clenched. When that laughter reached her ears, something in her broke. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and unrelenting. She covered her mouth, choking back the sob. It had been so long since she heard her daughter laugh like that, truly laugh. Not from nervousness or pain, just joy. And for the first time since that awful day in the canyon, Eliza allowed herself to feel something other than fear. Not yet peace, but maybe its distant cousin. That night, Jack found her folding laundry on the back porch, her face half hidden in the lamplight. She's strong, he said. Eliza looked up. Too strong for her age. She is not alone anymore. Neither are you, he almost said. But the words stayed behind his teeth. Instead, he handed her a cup of tea. Their fingers brushed, a small thing, but in that single touch was a promise, unspoken, but deeply felt. They sat in silence, the prairie wind weaving through the porch rails. Somewhere inside, Clara sang to her doll, off-key but content. And under that wide starlit sky, Jack felt something stir again. Hope maybe, or something like the beginning of love. The storm came without warning. One moment the sky was blue, streaked with wisps of autumn gold. The next it turned black as coal, the wind howling like a wounded beast across the plains. Dust kicked up in furious spirals. Horses nigh and stomped in their stalls. Jack dropped the hayfork mid-pitch and ran for the barn. Inside, Clara screamed. Eliza, he shouted, pushing open the heavy door, now half hung on its hinges. The rain pounded sideways, and lightning lit the world in bursts of white. Clara clung to a support beam, her feet slipping in the rising mud. Eliza was beside her, shielding her daughter with her own body, soaked to the bone, hair plastered to her face. A fallen rake had wedged the barn door half shut, trapping them inside. Jack heaved the door free, water slapping his back in sheets. He reached Eliza first. Come on, he yelled. She tried to rise, but her leg buckled. Clara screamed again. Without a word, Jack swept Eliza into his arms, cradled her like glass, then took Clara's hand, and pulled them both toward the house. The fire roared in the hearth. Jack had stripped off his coat, and hung 3 blankets near the flames. He handed Eliza a dry towel without speaking, then wrapped another around Clara, who was already fast asleep in the corner, bundled in quilts, clutching her damp doll. Eliza sat by the fire, trembling. Her dress clung to her like second skin, revealing every bruise, every scar. Her fingers were white, her lips trembling not from cold, but from something deeper, something breaking loose after too long caged. Jack crouched beside the stove, stirring hot tea in silence. The only sounds were the crackling logs and the low moan of wind at the windows. Then Eliza spoke. He died trying to protect us. Jack did not move. Daniel, my husband, we were on our way to start over. Dry Creek was supposed to be a new beginning. She stared into the flames, voice distant, raw. They came out of nowhere, 5 of them, guns, laughing like it was sport. Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. He told me to run. He pushed me and Clara behind the wagon. I saw him take the bullet. He fell without a sound. Jack placed the mug beside her, then sat on the floor. He said nothing. They took everything, she continued, eyes glassy. The wagon, our food, my mother's shawl. They even tore open our seed bags like it was a game.